All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Nadia. So right now you are joining the War on Youth webinar. Before we go into a little bit of background on what we mean by the War on Youth and how the coalition has been engaged in building power with that, just basically wanted to go over a few logistics. So Hamid, if you want to go over that, that would be great. And then basically from there, I'll give a brief background about what this fight has been. And then we'll go into our really, really dope panelists today. I'm really excited, the group we have. So I think folks are gonna really rep well. So yeah, Hamid, if you can go into
Sure.
logistics first, that would be great.
Great. Thank you, Nadia. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our Power Not Paranoia webinar series. This is part 12 of our webinar series that we've been doing. And because of Zoom bombing and people trying to infiltrate, so we have not been taking too many security measures because you didn't have to go through an ID and password and all of that. So we're trying to keep access as easy as possible. But what we have done is that we've sort of like kept access limited. But always open as well on request. So people, besides the panelists, everybody else has been is going to remain on mute. If you want to send a message, then please just go ahead and put a message or a question or a comment in the chat room. And that information will come to the hosts, and then we'll share it with the facilitators. If you're on the phone, you're welcome to text your comment or question as well at 562-230-4578. 562-230-4578. And I think that's basically it. So any comment, any questions, and whenever Nadia and all you all want to decide, we can even unmute everybody or just kind of stay where it is. So take it away.
Cool, thank you. Yes, and maybe, Hamid, if you could maybe put your phone number in the chat, that would be helpful, actually, probably for folks who are on the phone. I don't know if you usually do that, but just a thought.
The problem is that we are not going to everybody, so I'll just keep on announcing it.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then so basically what we'll do is, like I said, we have really wonderful panelists today, and so we'll be, I'll be asking a few questions, they'll be answering it, and then in about an hour, maybe a little more than an hour, then we'll go and open it up for dialogue. So if you do have questions, if you have comments, feel free to put it into the chat. Feel free to name it when we try to unmute folks. So there will definitely be opportunities for that. So before we go into some of the background, before we go into the intros, just wanted to give a really brief background so folks know. So with the coalition, when we talk about the war on youth, for us, pre-COVID, when we were all really meeting in person and everything, what these meetings have served for is for us to come together to share knowledge and really build on the work, right? So when we talk about the war on youth, for us, it's looking at how Black and Brown and Muslim and Indigenous and immigrant youth are seen as threats to national security under this violent extremism, terrorism narrative, right? And so basically with that, basically with that, what that means is, so there's programs such as Countering Violent Extremism, which essentially labels people as potential violent extremists for exhibiting certain behaviors. And so within Countering Violent Extremism, we have what's called Preventing Violent Extremism in Schools, PVE. So these were basically guidelines that, that were passed in 2016 and essentially names behaviors of young people for us teachers. I'm a teacher, for teachers to look out for students to look out for each other, and basically snitch on each other. So if they exhibit behaviors such as being too much into their culture, right? Expressing anger or frustration, questioning authority, and what else? Being too much into your culture, questioning authority, and various other behaviors that were. And so for us, we know that this really continues the legacy of criminalizing, particularly Black and Brown youth. And so, so really what we're seeing is the gang narrative used for the past few decades. And so now this transition is going into labeling young people as potential terrorists, potential violent extremists. And so Stop LAPD Spying came together with Palestinian Youth Movement, at the time the BSU from UCI, and various other organizations to really push back and fight. And so really taking the fight to the classroom, to the schools, to City Hall, pushing the mayor to reject a $430,000 grant for implementing countering violent extremism, and doing various workshops around art, and also really the core and the goal of it has been around building power, not paranoia, and just really shout out. There's a few folks on here who have been really integral to that fight as well, and so that's a very, very brief background of the War on Youth fight with the coalition, and so. Now what I'd like to do is really then connect it to the panelists as well. And so, and feel free, even for those of you who've been part of the Coalition's War on Youth Fight, who are on the panel, feel free to even add what I said as well. And so that being said, if each of you could just maybe do like a 1-minute introduction, however you want to introduce yourselves would be great. And then we'll go into the questions. And just as a reminder for folks who joined, we're going to be doing some questions with the folks on the webinar, some of the panelists, and then in about an hour, we'll open it up for community dialogue. You're welcome to put any questions or comments in the chat. If you're not able to access the chat, you can text a phone number, and then Hamid will be able to put it on there, and that phone number is 562-230-4578. And again, a reminder to the panelists, if you did mute yourself and want to be unmuted again, just go ahead and hit the raise hand. So yes, okay, so let's get into it now. So if anybody would like to start from the panelists, so just about a 1-minute intro would be great. Should I just maybe like call the orgs?
Hey, my name is Jared, or I go by J-Bo or King J-Bo when it comes to my music or my friends. I'm with the Youth Justice Coalition, the LA Youth Uprising Coalition, and Justice LA Coalition. I've been doing this work for a couple years now. First thing I got involved in was the 5% campaign, which was to create a youth development department and divest 5% from law enforcement. I've been involved in the war on youth kind of stuff for ever since I've been organizing, and even before because I was a victim of it. That's just a little bit about me. I'm looking forward to talking to everyone here today, and looking forward to hearing to enlightening each other and learning from each other today.
Nice, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Zaza, and I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement. And I've been in the org since 2015. And I'll be saying a little bit more about the org and what it does during the actual speaking portion. But yeah, I just wanted to give that brief introduction now.
Thank you, Omar. Anyone who would like to go next? Glenda, you want to go?
Hello, everyone. My name is Glenda. I'm a youth organizer at Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I've been organizing with them for a little over 5 years now. I work primarily on the War on Youth fight, facilitating multiple workshops, and I'm a college student. I'm going into my second year of college at Cal State Long Beach, where I study speech pathology.
Nice, thank you. All right, who would like to go next?
Hey y'all, it's Nina, she, her, ella pronouns. I'm with Bby Anarchists, and we're a collective of autonomous, anti-authoritarian, anarchist-leaning, and rooted in indigenous practices. Yeah, we've done a few work both here and in the borders, as well as with prisoners and political prisoners here in the States, and folks in like indigenous political prisoners in Oaxaca as well, but creating as well content to neutralize the narratives that the settler colony continues to shove down our throats, that we refuse to accept as our truth.
Hey everyone, this is Jojo. I am also a part of Bby Anarchists, and yeah, as Nina was saying, we used reclaimed art to uplift our community. The group started in September 2019, and it was just a way to shout out new organizers coming onto the scene.
Thank you. And last but not least, I think we have the folks from Gender Justice LA.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Gabrielle. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a writer, poet, nonprofit, volunteer, and a local activist focused on economic inequality and systemic racism. I'm currently based in the San Fernando Valley, which has a history of white supremacist activity. I've definitely noticed my privacy being jeopardized through surveillance and oppression tactics, the silencing of my voice, and attempts to gaslight my experience as a person of color. I was a part of Gender Justice LAC's Liberación leadership program in conjunction with Trans Latina Coalition. I'm also familiar with other leftist circles like DSA LA, Sunrise Movement LA, Street Watch, SFV, Black Lives Matter LA, LA Tenants Union, the Justice Collaborative, People City Council, and many more grassroots movements fighting for the future of marginalized populations. I've been particularly interested in Stop LAPD spying work from reading an article in The Atlantic entitled "Do Algorithms Have a Place in Policing?", which highlights that PredPol was developed in the LAPD Foothill Division of San Fernando Valley to criminalize Black and brown youth of color.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, Izak here from Gender Justice LA, and yeah, a little bit about me. I've been organizing in Tongvaland, Los Angeles for over 15 years, and I'm always an organizer that's always remembering and reclaiming my roots, and so I identify as Chicanx, Latinx, and Pa'iaikila, and Hopi, which is from Arizona and New Mexico. I'll talk a little bit more about Gender Justice LA, but essentially we're working to build the power of trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary, Black, Indigenous, POC, color, and nationality, and beyond. And yeah, I just want to say, organizing as a young person saved my life, and really started to give me purpose. And I was being politicized young, as a lot of us are, and so I really see youth and young folks in the movement as essential to shifting some major pieces in our world. So I'm glad to be there. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And so yeah, let's just jump right in. So the first question, and the one thing I was going to also say as well, and so whenever, Hamid, at any point during the webinar, you can pull it up now or later. We do have a zine we've been making that a few of us have been coming together to make. And our most recent one that we released was actually around the various wars on youth. And shout out to Bby Anarchists the graphics for that, and to a lot of the folks actually on this panel for really putting in a lot of work on that. So just let's going in then. So basically the question I have, so I'm basically gonna have 4 questions. Hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. And the first one is, what is the role of youth in the current uprisings, right? So we know right now, of course, there's different narratives and different ways it's being talked about. For us, we call them uprisings. And so, so for each of you, what do you think, what is the role of youth in the current uprisings? If anyone would like to start?
Yeah, I think our youth or the youth have several different roles within movement building. That's historically also the folks that have come out and have moved shit. Like that's being out in the streets and regardless of whether or not you want to call them or classify them between looters and protesters or whatever it is, it doesn't. I think everyone has a different role, and if we want to talk about like respectability politics and who's considered or whose voices are being acceptable, I think the true violence lies on the fact that people have to resort in a pandemic where a lot of people have lost their jobs and are grieving and using different tactics to heal and understanding that they're not going to take shit from the state that continues to deprive our communities from holistic well-being and not to criminalize folks, because we've grown up and we've seen our homies being locked up. We've grown up and seen our family members and folks in our communities not for anything that puts them at risk in the community, but for fucking being criminalized for not having food and not having the resources that should be fucking a human right. Sorry for my cousin, pero.
Thank you. Glenda, you want to go for it? I see you.
I don't know. I feel like it just makes sense. Like we're just like the navigators. Like we're willing to be on the front lines and, you know, speak our voices and talk our shit, and like willing to like educate our families and communities on like what's going on. And I see a lot of it, especially like on social media, like when it comes to like signing certain petitions, like what is right, like what is wrong. I don't know. Navigators just like popped into my head, like.
Yeah, I feel that really putting yourselves out there, definitely. Maybe Omar or Jared. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can go. So I think I've been waiting for a few minutes because the question for us is kind of, it's a little bit loaded, and there's like things that I don't think I have the time to necessarily get into. But before we can talk about the role of youth in the current uprisings, I think we have to scale back to the very beginning of PYM. And even the name of the organization, Palestinian Youth Movement, already foregrounds youth. And there's a specific reason for that, which I think folks who have studied anti-colonial, you know, liberation movements throughout history will intuitively understand. You know, even if, you know, you're not necessarily thinking about Palestine or talking about Palestine, right? You understand the logic where there's a place that's been colonized, the people rise up, they do armed resistance, and then all of a sudden those armed resistance movements do a new platform, which is, okay, we're going to get a state. And then in doing that, they basically betray the old tenets of the struggle, right? And so for us, that moment was really what's referred to as the Oslo Accords, or the so-called peace process of the early 90s. So PYM as an org really started in the mid-2000s, and it started from this idea of, okay, what happens next? How do we as youth, you know, and youth meaning, it can be a very specific definition, meaning young people, but it also just means all of the newer generations who were abandoned or left behind by this decision, which resulted in a lot of political betrayals, right? Including saying that Palestine, which in the beginning, you know, all the way up through the anti-colonial uprisings leading up through the 60s and 70s, right? At that time, Palestine was something that connected everybody wherever you were, whether you were exiled, whether you were a refugee. If you're Palestinian, the logic was you have a stake in a future liberated homeland, right? You saw that iconography of the guerrilla fighters with guns and a keffiyeh, and you knew that they were also fighting for you and you were fighting with them. What happened after Oslo essentially is, there's a newly formed thing called the Palestinian Authority. There's a leadership that says, we're done with that. It's only the people in the occupied territories that we really are going to talk about. Refugees, we don't care about. People in exile, you're done. You figure your own stuff out, and that's it. So when PYM started, it was basically responding to the question of how do we counteract that and how do we rethink a political program that allows all Palestinians, wherever they are, to get back into the struggle and to think about what national liberation can look like that is no longer concerned with just getting a state, right? Because it's one thing to talk about getting a state, but getting a state doesn't necessarily mean having sovereignty, right? And so folks who work on, like including us who do indigenous struggle and solidarity indigenous struggle also know that, right? You can have a state, but if your state is a piece of grass and the people who are around the piece of grass don't have any political rights, you don't really have anything. You can say politically, yeah, we have a state, but it doesn't mean anything, right? And so for us, in a lot of ways, the old leadership had betrayed the Palestinian struggle by doing that. So we had always foregrounded youth in what we were doing. But fast forwarding, up to the past few years and even up to the present moment, I think if you're talking about uprisings, right, uprisings in Palestine, for example, I think one thing that's a very strong parallel is that we are very used to this idea of youth being stigmatized in various ways. So people who rise up in the United States, right, you see this thing of, oh, they're outside agitators, they're terrorists, they're thugs, right? Palestinians who rise up, right, and who reject kind of the monopoly that the so-called leadership has over their struggle, who engage in various forms of resistance, including armed resistance, to try to get back their state, they're called terrorists, right? And so I think intuitively there's this understanding that youth, in a lot of ways, once there's this political oppression that's so entrenched that there's nothing left to do, where, it literally forces people to rise up, youth and the people who rise up alongside them, even if they're not youth in the very literal sense of the term, they're part of those generations that are saying we're done with this old generational status quo. All of those are the people to be stigmatized. So I think, we recognize, even as, we recognize in the same way that we see youth rising up, as the vanguard of the Palestinian struggle, on the ground in Palestine, and in many ways, in the refugee camps, in occupied, territories, we also see the people who are rising up now as being the vanguard of what's happening now, because, what we're seeing is not new, right? It's just something that's become so oppressive, that's so locked down that there's nothing left but resistance, right? So we're talking about, over 400 years, we're talking about slavery, settler colonialism. So I think because of our basically political awareness as Palestinians, we recognize the uprisings now as being, the province really of the vanguard that needs to be supported in as many ways as possible.
Thank you, Omar.
That's dope. That's dope. Thank you for that. I've been to a couple of the protests. Some of them I ended up getting away by the skin of my teeth. We had some folks from YJC that ended up getting arrested and stuff like that. I'm not surprised. Ever since, like, in forever, youth culture and youth has been the forefront of all these movements. Even if you think about the Black Panthers, right? One of the main leaders, Huey P. Newton, he was only like 21 and 22 years old when he was leading the Black Panther movement. And right now, like, when we go to these marches, when I was in Beverly Hills at the one at Fairfax district, it was mainly the youths that took over. Youths were the forefront, youths were the leaders, and the youth culture is what's really taking over and what's really making an impact. And I feel like what's happening with the media and what's happening with everything else isn't a surprise to me, because, they've been trying so hard to keep youth culture locked in and criminalize youth culture and stuff like that. Especially when it comes to the media, they talk about looting and stuff like that. But I feel like without the youth culture, the movement wouldn't be that strong. The youths are the ones out there at the forefront in this movement, in the uprising happening right now. We are the leaders. We are the ones that are setting the pace in a lot of these spaces. Only thing I can say is a lot of time we don't get acknowledged for it. We get criminalized for it. So for our role right now is actually the forefront, the leaders, the people who are really pushing the movement. And a little bit about that, YJC is actually having a youth-led action this Friday in downtown. We're gonna also it's also families led. We have a coalition called Stop Coalition, which stands for Stop Terrorizing and Oppression by Police, Violence, and they're partnering with it too. Those are mostly people who had loved ones or people from their family that lost their lives to law enforcement. And that's just the next example. Like it was all of the demands came together by youth. All the organizers coming together by youth. And I'm just so happy and proud of seeing what the youth are doing today in our generation.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Jabo. It really just makes me think of how then what are like those of us who aren't youth, how are we really supporting and uplifting? Because yeah, the youth really are the ones putting themselves out there. And then I think we just have gender justice folks.
Hi, I can go. I think everything that everyone else has said has just been so spot on. I don't really need to add that much more to it. But I believe that the youth exists to give basically a fresh face and a brighter energy to fighting against this historical systemic oppression. I think they're meant to uplift our spirits and to provide a new way of thinking about the same time-old issues and shift conversations into the mainstream about the solutions to the problems that are within our communities.
Yeah, I'll just add a few things to that. I think that young people, youth, are have a responsibility and a role from the legacy of our ancestors and our ancestors, and whether folks are in a place to take on that role is a journey. And so different people get it at different points in their life, and so I guess with that comes like a lot of responsibility in terms of making sure that that folks are honoring their ancestors, knowing that history, and because it lives on through young people. And then also I'll just say, like, I'm so excited whenever I hear just like badass youth on point, just like breaking it down in ways that it just blows my mind. And I'm just like, so like, hopeful. I think the word is hopeful. And there is an energy and being able to understand your voice at a certain point in your life, and then to really like use your power with that voice. And so youth are artists, dreamers, visionaries, and shapeshifters. They can youth can really shift things, like I was saying, in this world. And so I feel really excited about what is going to happen in our future and for future generations.
Thank you all. Thank you. Really, really appreciate your answers and what you have to share about that. And some of you already got into the history piece, and that basically is going into our next question. So maybe we could just go in the same order. That would be great. And also one thing I know in checking in ahead of time with folks, kind of when we talk about youth, we acknowledge that can mean different ages, right? Some folks think it's up to age 25, 24, up to 30, right? And then knowing in our state and in this criminalizing state what it means to be 18 and under, 18 and over, right? So so just want to acknowledge and that we do have different definitions of who are youth as well. And yeah, echoing what you said, Isak, that I was listening to a webinar earlier and just hearing some students really break it down too. So yeah, I just want to echo that. So basically, with what you all were talking about, some of the current uprisings, the next question is around the history, right? So how are the current uprisings that we're seeing, how are they building on a history building power against these various wars on youth, right? Our different organizations, our different communities are fighting back against the various wars that are happening on youth. So how are the current uprisings building on that history of building power? Maybe Bby Anarchists, could we start with you all again?
Yeah, I can try giving that a go. I think one of the things, right, that I saw while joining the protesters and just being a part of that energy, I felt a lot of like the generational rage that may come up or that has come up, I think, across communities, and letting that be a guiding force, right? Because there's this idea that rage can be deconstructive. But I think that the validity of Black rage is something that people have, like you have to, people have to pay attention to it. And I think that that's the thing about these, like the protests. People want to criticize it, right? And criticize the youth, particularly because of certain tactics. I'll just wait till this passes. Criticizing the youth for certain tactics, particularly youth of color, Black and brown youth. But the reality is, right, like there is generational rage, trauma that comes up. And with that, also the generational resiliency within like specifically the Black community, and how that has influenced movements and has shaped our society, is definitely something that I get a sense when I am out in the front lines and building with the youth. So this like uncensorship and just, this is the brutal history of the country we live in, and there is no longer going to be a censorship or any sort of like capping in terms of exposing the truth, right? We do live in a police state, and I think that the youth have shown the ways in which that is true in our society today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, to echo what Jojo was saying, like youth have historically always had a place in the movement. Like when we look at the Black Panther Party, which someone had lifted earlier, like we always tend to forget that a lot of these folks were youth that were seeing the police brutality and seeing the ways in which the settler colony was different for Black Americans and Black folks in the U.S. And folks like Fred Hampton, they were 22 when they started doing Cop Watch and doing a lot of the programs that are a lot of the things that we have, like the free food program that we have is thanks to the work that the free lunch programs that they had for folks and the breakfast programs. So it's going on a historic thing of like youth being able to, or having the capacity as well, and also making sure that we look into our history and we use the tactics and the lessons learned from our elders and from the folks that have been doing this work, because we don't pretend to know and have all the answers, but understanding and reading history, we know that power is never given, it's taken.
Thank you. Let's see, I think, who was that? I think Glenda, were you next?
I think so. I don't know, I was still trying to like think of the question. I think it's just like we're still fighting. Like we still have to fight. Like it's a continuous fight, and it's nothing new. It's been happening, and it shows like after all this time, like youth can still organize. Like youth are organizers, and like I was just saying before, like we are willing to put ourselves on the front line. Like I don't know. I was just thinking. Like, we just go up there and just have all this hope and like this energy.
I think Glenda might have gotten frozen. Okay, hopefully she's able to. Oh, Glenda, you were frozen for about 10, 15 seconds.
Okay. All right. I'll have to start over. Like I was saying, it's just like a continuous fight that we have to fight. And what was I saying? Oh, it's just youth. Like youth can organize. Youth can fucking organize. And it's like we just have all this like hopefulness and energy that we can just go out there and like help other people, help educate other people, and that we're willing to be like on the front lines, like just doing it. Because I think it was JoJo who said this, like the thing about generational trauma, like we can feel that, especially within the Black community, like we can feel that. You know, a lot of people like say, you know, it was a long time ago, like forget about it, da, da, da. But it's like it wasn't that long ago. We still have to fight and say, you know, Black Lives Matter. Like,
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Glenda. I believe it was Omar, right? You were next.
Yeah. So I guess kind of building off what's already been said, the question of, you know, how do the current uprisings show the role that youth has always played? I think to me, I think it's as simple as understanding that every single time that there's been an uprising, it's been against the system that is oppressive. And, you know, I don't think the surprising thing should be that there's an uprising. The surprising thing should be that there's still the same system in a lot of senses, right? Maybe with some light kind of changes, switches here and there, but overall the same things are in place, right? And I think I agree with the idea of the category of youth not being super literal in the sense of denoting an age group, but I think that part of how oppression is working is also relying on people forgetting things that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, right? But you can draw in some ways a direct line from, you know, the mid to late 60s all the way up to now. If you're thinking about the US in terms of uprising, right? There's been uprisings against racialized policing, surveillance, systemic poverty. This is not new, right? And if anything, that's what a lot of the folks on the ground are saying now. And yet, you know, the system itself doesn't change, and yet the uprising becomes the thing that's made to be so sensational. And again, I think that we think of that in terms of parallel with what's happening in Palestine, because it's precisely the same thing. There's in the sense that you have the dynamic of uprising, and then the panic about the uprising, the panic about the so-called terrorists, the panic about, you know, the people who just can't get along and accept and make peace and dialogue, et cetera, right? So I think that thinking the idea that youth are always the ones who rise up, however you want to define youth, shows the role that they've always played. They've always been the ones who rise up when things won't change. And if they continue to rise up, it's even more the condemnation of the things that people refuse to let change, right? And I think we really have to center that when we continue to fight in various ways. Because, you know, on the one hand, we can feel very exhausted and very tired, like, oh, we have to keep doing this. But on the other hand, you know, really, we should take heart in the fact that everything we continue to do is a condemnation of the things that have refused to budge. And really, I think the moral weight, the ethical weight is behind the people who rise up, because they're the ones who expose that, right? Wherever they are, however they rise up. So I think it's really important to center and uplift that.
Nice, thank you. And just as a reminder, folks, we are talking right now about how the current uprisings are building on a history of building power against the various wars on youth. And yeah, so Jabo, would you like to go next?
Yeah, and this for me, like this question was deep. Like it's a tricky question for me because as far as in like the current uprising, it is building a lot of power and it is building momentum. And like Omar said, you know, this has been happening not just since the 1960s, but like since forever. Black people and Native American people, there was just a different form of law enforcement and stuff like that, you know, and it was more brutal to a certain point because you know, they used to slaughter Native American people just to take their land and rape their women, and slaughter Black people just for wanting to be free, which is something that we're facing today. Just that it's finally getting filmed, and it's finally something that we're paying attention to. However, I feel like we're building power amongst ourselves, and there's some type of momentum that everyone is looking at. Like, these people are angry, these people are ready. But I feel like it's happened before, and what I'm praying for and hoping for is that it's not something that fades away, and that we take advantage of this moment and keep on pushing towards the end goal. And also, what I'm scared of is that, you know, a lot of people are talking about the movement and talking about what's happening, and I feel like youths are getting left out of the talk. Youths are getting left out of the you know, the conversations about who's leading these movements or something like that. I feel like we're still getting criminalized at these protests, and we're still getting brutalized at these protests, but we are leading it. And I feel like there's a conversation that needs to come up on a national standpoint, even on a global standpoint, to bring up that it's not just for, I mean, all Black Lives Matter, and all people of color, like brown people too, they matter. But I do believe that there's some point that we need to take out some time to prioritize what's happening with the youths. I acknowledge that the youths are the ones leading this movement, and actually pay them their reparations and treat them like they deserve to do it. I could even talk about me being a youth organizer. A lot of times, YJC is the only people with youths in the room. We have so many different funders, so many different county officials or state officials and stuff like that. And when everybody's giving their stuff, like sometimes when you say youth organizer, like they don't acknowledge you to a certain point. But if you say community organizer, they acknowledge you as someone who, you know, influence or something like that. But as a youth, they just like brush it to the side. So I feel like there needs to be a bigger conversation on youth building power with each other and advocating for us to have that conversation and demand that respect.
Yes, thank you. And then last but not least, Gabrielle, Lisa.
Hi. Yes. So I'm not sure if this answer is necessarily in response to building upon the history that everyone has been so eloquently talking about already, but I think that the what we're living in is complacency from some people. I think just a system that is continuing to disenfranchise us, and I believe that within the youth there's an understanding that just because these are the way that things have always been done, it's not necessarily the right way or the only path to success. So I think reimagining the idea of how we are our current ways of being, I think that's something that is much more flexible within our young people than trying to have some of these conversations with people who are already, you know, upset or saying like, oh yes, this is just how it is, and it just takes a long time. It's like, well, why aren't we pushing that? Well, why aren't we working to change that? Like, should we just be sitting down and saying, okay, well, we accept that? Like, not necessarily. So I think I would just say that in response to how I feel about this question.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, I feel what I'm hearing too is Gabe, from you is, you know, a jadedness, that kind of the complacency that happens, and it is unfortunate, you know, and so, but I am a believer that people can shift and change, you know, with the right conversations. I wanted to kind of uplift. I have this little photo I wanted to show. I don't know if I can get the work, but
oh, yay!
Nice.
Revolutionary, amazing trans woman who I think about in terms of as part of like trans history and building on the power. Like I don't know. I think I read somewhere that her and Sylvia Rivera, another amazing activist and just trans person who has fighting for our issues for a long time before their death. I think they were around 18. I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows, but I remember just reading around like they were young folks and like on the mic in a time where nobody was speaking out in the gay community. And so, I just wanted to give a little shout out to them and also think about, I think that there's many different ways that youth can plug in, and I don't necessarily think it's all like there's social media now. There's young people can plug in that's not necessarily always on the street, especially if we're thinking about disabled youth and folks that just can't get to those rallies for whatever reason, right? I think that that's, and in a lot of ways, just kind of thinking about like how youth have done different things from different angles and the importance of that. And I do think intergenerational organizing is really important, not for like the youth specifically, but like for elders and yelders, young elders, and just people in general to kind of engage in those conversations and to listen to each other. And I think that there's also this thing around, learning around how people organize, youth organize, and being able to take those moments to celebrate and have joy and release. I think is also part of the shift that I've seen over the years around like, oh no, that is like actually an active way to resist state violence. And I do think it's essential when we're talking about organizing. So I just wanted to like uplift healing wellness and the generational trauma that we have to undo. And part of that is celebrating our wins, right? So yeah, it's just
Yes, the term I've heard before, right? Radical joy. And what does that really mean? So yeah, thank you for lifting that. So really then, kind of with the last two questions, first want to go into just really give y'all also the opportunity to share what, coming from various communities, various groups, and some of you have already touched on this, so feel free to just build on that. But so what is the role of each of your groups, of each of our groups, in fighting the various wars on youth? And so, yeah, if you just want to talk about how you see the role of your community and or your group, and what is the war in youth that y'all are fighting? So yeah, if we can maybe just go down the same order, if that works for folks. So I think so.
Yeah, if you could just remind us of what the order is.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So yeah, I think it was Bby Anarchists, and then Stop LAPD Spying, and then I believe you, and then YJC. Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
For sure. So the question is, what is the role in the movement, Nadia?
Yeah, what is the role of your group, of your community in fighting the various wars on youth?
Nina, do you have an answer for that?
I think what comes, the first thing that comes to mind is just like creating, and I think that with youth, it's being able to reimagine or imagine worlds without cops, and what community safety actually looks like, and what power in the community looks like. And part of it is before we get to abolition, we have to be able to visualize what it is that our needs as community folks, because we have gone through heavy forms of conditioning and society and schooling that tells us that like white supremacy and cis heteropatriarchy and the things that the settler colony is rooted in is truth when we know that it's not, and it's not rooted in community love, and it's not rooted in the best thinking of our folks. And so part of it is creating and starting to have those conversations with our folks regarding what do we want. We know a strategy is defunding police, but it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is the abolition of police that have never been here to serve and protect our communities, but are here to serve and protect the settler colony and property that has been stolen, and that this is stolen Tongva land. Like, let's acknowledge who looted who first. So I think it's mainly with acknowledging and uplifting that as well.
Yes, thank you. Glenda?
I just unmuted Jojo as well. Sorry. Well,
oh, sorry.
Sorry, my bad.
Thank you. No, I have a lot of background noise. That's why I muted. But yeah, I just agree with everything that Nina said. And I think that our critical, or like our main role as artists, and specifically I think as non-Black POC, is really to, like, specifically in this moment, being, you know, like knowing how to stand in solidarity with our communities and with our Black relatives. So really just trying to figure out the ways that we can best support, because right now, you know, I think it is a time for a lot of people to take a step back, specifically like non-Black folks, take a step back and see what is it that within our own, right, like within the so-called Latinx community, there's a huge anti-Black sentiment that is expressed across generations, right, newer generations as well as older generations. And so really trying to combat that in our communities, address it, and then just figure out how we can best support our Black relatives in the struggle.
Nice, thank you. Glenda, take it away.
Okay. I feel like with Stop LAPD Spying, we do a really good job of giving youth space, giving them space to speak and be creative. And from what I've been away for a while because of school. I remember like we did like a lot of workshops. We had a digital security trading workshop with school surveillance and art workshop. That was really fun. We did, and we did our like little history lesson and let you express how they feel about it. We've done, I don't know if you're familiar with Stop LAPD's spying soccer state, that Venn diagram graphic. So we were working on another graphic for like a youth soccer state, just like putting down different ideas, like looking at the school system differently when it comes to like administration and like student council, counselors, teachers, other students, and I think, yeah, that's it. I like the workshops. We do a good job on the workshops. I really like those. I know the design. We've been working on the zine. We've been working on that. I know that we handed out like a COVID pamphlet, and just how like this is not a moment in time, but like a continuation of history when it comes to police using their power in times of crisis.
Nice, thank you. That reminds me too, Glenda, how we need to got to get back to the youth stalker state. So call out to anyone on the call if they want to help out with that, creating that. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we're basically talking about what is the role of each of our groups in fighting the various wars on youth. Omar, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think talk about fighting the wars on youth. one of the things that comes to mind is that Palestinian Youth Movement, for a while now, I think, has been trying to work with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition to think about the ways that Zionism, which is the settler colonial ideology that justifies the state of Israel and the ongoing, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the way that that connects with a lot of surveillance programs in the United States, surveillance and policing programming. So things like CVE, which was mentioned earlier, as well as policing. When you think about police exchanges with Israel, which isn't to say that exchanges with Israel make policing completely the way it is, because obviously policing here has its own origins, right, in slavery and indigenous genocide. But at the same time, the ways that settler states swap and kind of share the latest tactics with one another, and the ways that indigenous peoples, right, whether they're indigenous folks here, or whether they're, the Palestinians, are often kind of the lab rats for the latest in killing or brutalizing technologies and spying technologies, really, right? And so the ways that colonies become the perfect labs for testing those things out and then bringing them back to the so-called advanced states, right? So one of the ways is really trying to continue to understand how logics of CVE and folks targeted by CVE are those who are also kind of pinpointed because of their identity, right? Because of their straddling of various cultural, religious identities, racial identities, and how there's a lot of overlap in the ways that logics of, criminalization go with kind of an anti-Palestinian and Islamophobic, anti-Black, Islamophobic as well sentiment, right? And how all of those things kind of work together to produce the idea of who is a suspect, right? And even when that's not on the streets, that's also in the classrooms when you think about things like PVE or Prevent, right? Who are the students who are the most likely to act up or rise up, right? And if you look at a lot of the logics for monitoring students who may be in trouble, quote unquote, right, they also talk about Muslim students. They talk about Muslim students who might be prone to being bullied, quote unquote, right? But they don't actually talk about Islamophobia itself as a producer of that, but they talk about the students themselves just for the sake of being Muslim, right? Whatever being Muslim happens to mean in that classroom, right? Automatically, they're more prone to being radicalized, right? Or not being, the terminology they'll use is socially cohesive. So I think that that's one important project, right? Trying to collaborate, with a lot of the brilliant folks in the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition to talk about that. Like, what are the larger overlaps in different projects, seemingly different projects of colonialism, policing, and surveillance, right? And how can we unpack those overlaps, right? So that we understand that even though we're not necessarily talking about the same thing in terms of an immediate identity, we're talking about very similar logics, right? That are used to brutalize people, to kill people, and to dispossess people. And I think, outside of that, since there's already been some youth organizing touched on, we'll also say that in light of the current uprisings in the current moment, right, some of what we've been doing is really trying to kind of get our youth in various states, because PYM has chapters in various states, right, to really work with their local shop owners to things like give them resources that were needed for the COVID-19 pandemic when that started. So masks, antiseptic, things like that, giving communities that maybe can't afford those things, right, trying to provide mechanisms for them being able to get it. But then also, now in light of this, only the most recent wave of police murders, right, we've also been thinking about not thinking about like starting programs for actually making things like clothing, for example, Palestinians for Black Liberation, selling that and making sure all the proceeds go to bail funds for organizers, right? So very concrete ways. And, I like that the question of unpacking anti-Blackness in communities was addressed. So we're definitely thinking about that as well. But also thinking about how even as we talk about that as kind of a logic, making sure that people reject aspirational whiteness, we also don't neglect the more material dimensions of what that can look like. So for example, if we talk to folks who are invested in businesses or doing businesses, we don't just talk to them about, don't aspire to whiteness. We also say, don't call the police. And this is what not calling the police looks like. This is what your community actually wants you to do. These are the people you're accountable to. So actually putting those structures in place as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Jebo, would you like to go next? Around the role of your group in fighting the various wars on youth?
Yeah, so well, YJC, we're a youth-led organization. Most of our decisions are youth-led. Like a lot of everything that happens at YJC, you has an impact in. And I feel like that's one of the first steps in actually doing it, is decision-making power, right? Actually giving youth not just the voice, but the opportunity for their voice to be heard. Um, so a lot of the times when it comes to our campaigns and stuff like that, it is a youth, like the demands come from youth who have been impacted by this direct campaign. And I feel like one of the main campaigns that we've been fighting for forever is the 5% campaign. Um, it's been happening. We've been fighting for it for a long time, but we want to dive. You know, in LA County, there's no holistic youth development department or framework, um, and they spend $300,000 a year on incarcerating a youth in juvenile hall or camps, but um, they spend way less than that and giving youth an education or even giving youths just some money towards the youth development department. So we've been fighting for a 5% campaign, which is going to divest 5% of law enforcement budget into a divest for 5% of law enforcement budget into a youth development department, which is going to consist of 100 youth centers, um, 50,000 youth jobs. We want peace builders or intervention workers instead of having law enforcement, and those people got to be people that comes from our community. And honestly, like when I first got into the work, that was what got me into the work, but I never saw it possible or actually coming into life because of, you know, it's hard to see it when the system is set up the way it is. Like they really pray that we to hold us down. That's the way they were designed. But and Anthony's on this call too, but we are actually so the county ended up passing a motion to create the youth justice work group. We're talking about creating a youth development framework to move all youth out of probation into a youth development department or a youth development framework. And I feel like I mean, it's not a victory yet because we still got to get everything approved and send it in back. It's a 9 months process. If anyone wants to be a part of that, I don't know if Anthony can put his name in the chat and stuff, and he can tag y'all into it. But it's something that happens like a couple times a month. And we're coming up with a process of how we want it to look, how we want youth voice to be heard in LA. The next thing we worked on is actually the first youth commission in LA. So in LA County, we worked on the LA County's Youth Commission, which is going to have the first commission with youths on it. And right now we're fighting for power for what they could specifically do. We'll have a youth representative on probably like the Civilian Oversight Commission or something like that, or have the Youth Commission have different powers like that. And that's something that folks can tap into too, but it's really good that we ended up getting that passed. So right now, our main thing is actually giving you that decision-making power, because adults or anyone else that say we want to fight against the war for youth, it's really good to stand in solidarity. But if the youth aren't the ones making that decision, then there's not going to be a change that we want. It's not going to be a change that we validate. I feel like the only way to fight the war on youth is to give youth the power or give youth the opportunity to elevate their power towards ending the war on youth, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, J-Bo. Yeah, Gabrielle, Isaac, what is the role of y'all's groups in fighting the various wars on youth?
I believe that it's necessary to have spaces that affirm the youth's identity and they don't push them into a social standard that is perpetuated by the agents of capitalist ideology. Like I said previously, the youth rejecting the idea that there's only one inherent way of being. And I believe that the acceptance of diversity and access to viewing individuals beyond the stereotypes that we've been presented allows the youth to break barriers that have been erected by those that seek to divide us.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. I echo the clap.
Yeah. I think, yes, on point, on point. I do think so. So the role of, of Gender Justice LA, I think one of the most important pieces of our work is leadership like development, right? Youth come in as their own, with their own leadership that they came into walking up with, right? So I want to acknowledge that. But in the space where we're having our leadership programs, it's a moment to break non-conforming two-spirit youth out of isolation and come together and really think about each other's issues, even within our community. And I think that for in those moments of becoming more politicized or educated around amongst our own issues that our youth are facing, I think it's really important just that youth are 100% along the way in this work. I mean, our leadership programs are essential to the work. It's about building the power of and giving them all these skills, and it's not about, okay, now come into our organization and work for us. It's really about you choose what you want to do with this information, and a lot of folks end up staying on for 5 years, and coming to our the advisory board on our organization. And so I do think it's really important to center the voices of youth. And so if you're not bringing youth to your not doing any leadership programs, you're not bringing them to your rallies or one-on-one conversations, it's kind of like what are you doing? Because I think it's just so essential and important to the liberation of all of our people. And youth are just so brilliant, like I was talking about earlier. And I just want to highlight a person that I really love and admire, Michelle, who works over at Trans Latina Coalition. We did this collaboration with Seeds of Liberation Soul program for that Gabe was talking about. And, I really like that, she's a young person. She's 22 and she's doing all kinds of policy stuff and radical, working with Black and Pink and just doing a ton of stuff. She just is so talented. And I think when we harness youth and their voices, she's taking SB 2218 to make sure that I'll post it in the chat, but making sure that, we get allocated to the transgender community. A lot of folks don't know that it's like 3 cents of every $100 given to organizations, to LGBT organizations. That's only 3% given to LGBT orgs out of $100. And so even less for trans and gender nonconforming organizations. So we work with very, little, it's grassroots and, but we do feel it's vital to work is really uplifting and bringing youth into the work along the way.
Nice, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so I did have another question, but I know, since it's 7:15, I definitely want to open it to Q&A, to any kind of questions or comments. I know something that I really wanted to at some point lift is how, knowing that youth are putting themselves out there, right? And given the current landscape, given the uprisings, COVID, school closures, how are we building power in these intergenerational fights? And so I think about when I, just sort of seeing, the DA dropped some of the charges for folks who got arrested, over this last, this recent uprising, but knowing that a lot of folks' charges aren't going to get dropped. So I just think about how are we stepping up, those of us who don't identify as youth, how are we stepping up to really lift and center youth? But maybe instead of going into that, but that's just something I was thinking about, wanted to just open it up to see if folks have any comments or questions. I didn't see, I'm not sure if the chat, I didn't see anything in the chat, so I'm not sure if folks put anything there, or Hamid, if you have access to it.
No, we kept the chat to host only. The problem is that was the chat room was the spot that we got Zoom bombed. So, and some pretty obnoxious language was thrown in there. So we're just trying to maintain the integrity of the space. So if people feel free to post a question or a comment, on chat, and we'll share that with the facilitators. And also, if you want to text it to 562-230-4578. I do have a comment that was texted, Nadia, if I can read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So this is 3 cheers to the youth. Stay blessed and safe. I'm a grandma listening in the Zoom meeting tonight, listening to the youth of today articulating in such an eloquent way on their role in today's uprising. I have also been a young person once who participated in different kinds of uprisings. And I'd like to express my appreciation and love to you in my language. So this is in Urdu, and I can translate that into English. And it says that कि क़त्लगाहों से चुनके हमारे अलम और निकलेंगे उस शाख के काफ़िले जिनकी राह तलब से हमारे कदम मुख्तसर कर चले दर्द के फासले. So this is from Faz Ahmad Faz, who was a revolutionary poet, and he had written this whole poem on love and the letters between Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, the husband and wife that were executed by the U.S. government during McCarthy era. So these were their letters to each other in jail. And so, which basically means that from these killing fields shall rise the lovers of freedom, picking up the banners from the fallen ones. Because it was their pain that eased our path to liberation. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. That poetry, I think that line, every time I hear it, it really gets me and it really reminds me. So yeah, thank you for expressing and for sharing that.
So there's a question in the chat room, and the question is from Mike, that the youth are so inspiring to all of us. I would like to hear what is inspiring our panelists today, or rather their source of inspiration. So
and I think we don't have to go in any order. Any of our panelists, feel free to answer that. Maybe could you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, please. The youth are so inspiring to all of us. I would like to hear what is inspiring our panelists today, or rather their source of inspiration.
Nice.
If I could jump in on that, actually, I mean, to be honest, what inspires me is, resistance, to keep seeing resistance happening, uprisings happening. That's really inspiring. Things seem that they're the bleakest that they can possibly be. And then all of a sudden you see more people resisting and rising up and saying enough is enough and saying that this will not stand. And then it's really wonderful after that happens to see kind of like the different levels of bureaucracy and power kind of start to wring their hands and go, oh, I guess we can rethink some things, when they've tried to beat it into your heads all of this time that no, nothing can change, because I think for me that shows that, there's a way that power is arranged, that the state has a monopoly on violence, the wealthy have a monopoly on corporations, legitimate expression, but at the same time, the people have a very strong power that can never be taken away. And I think that's why youth are so key to these conversations. So every single time we see uprisings, every single time we see acts of refusal that in the moment are deemed terroristic or they're deemed criminal or they're deemed whatever, hindsight proves differently. And then all of a sudden everybody believes, oh yes, well now we know that was, but it's really the people who are resisting who lead that charge, right? So I really think it's just seeing continued resistance, even in the face of how intense repression can be. And that's really inspiring to me.
Thank you. Yeah, any of the other panelists, what is inspiring you?
Do you want to go ahead?
No, you can go ahead. I'll go after.
Okay. I just want to agree with everything that was just said. I think it's just survival pending revolution, right? Like I've been feeling pretty apathetic myself recently. Like I feel like I'm pushing so hard for change, and no one is listening or no one can see it. But no, they do see it. They're just rejecting that. So I think just that constant, like you said, resistance and proving that things can shift, that power can shift if we keep up the pressure that we do have and seeing the results that we can achieve, I think that is what's the most inspirational.
Thank you.
Jojo, were you gonna?
Jojo? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. I agree with, both sentiments. I think something that inspires me is, the acts of rebellion and radical joy that surround us, and being able to see and feel the collective power in our community. It's something that definitely inspires, I think, Baby Anarchist work, makes it so that, we're constantly trying to center our resiliency. And yeah, this idea of like radical joy, because I think that there's so many things oppressing large communities, and in my community. And so I think that when there are like things or moments that remind me of the importance of life and the beauty of it, and just how fragile it is, there's this like greater need to protect it. And that's something that, hopefully, yeah, continues to inspire us to do the work that we do.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if the word inspire would be the right word, because I don't do this work because I'm inspired, but I do this work because I have to. Every time I go outside, I feel the injustice, and not just to what's happening to my community members, but what happens to me. Just walking outside, being profiled by law enforcement, and stuff like that. But I could say what drives me or what keeps me driven is the love for my people, and the hope that someday we'll have the change that we want, the change that we are demanding. I'm hoping that one day I don't have to get up and worry if law enforcement pulls me over, if I'm going to get shot, or one day I don't have to get up and worry about if I'm undocumented, if I'm going to get deported, or if um, maybe like one day I don't have to worry about equity issues. I don't have to worry about, you know what, my neighbor could pay his rent, but I can't because I don't have access to the same opportunities that they do. I do this because it's something that I feel is necessary, and I said I'll do this because it's something that I feel we have to do. It's not something that, me personally, I don't feel like we have a choice. I feel like it's all of our duties, youth or not youth, to fight for change and fight for the change that we want to see, not only in ourselves, but in our community and in this country and the world.
Nice, thank you.
I have
So I
questions.
mhm.
I have a few other questions. Oh,
Sure.
I'm sorry. Do you? Okay.
Okay.
Should
Yeah,
I
no,
just?
I was gonna. Oops, sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, we could go to the questions. I was also seeing, would we try to unmute or for folks if they want to say a comment, or if anybody wants to speak, what would be the best way?
They can just raise their hand and we can unmute them, or put something in chat to be unmuted. I mean, we can try this, but there's a lot of noise, right? So
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can keep folks muted. And so, yeah, just a reminder, if anybody does want to, I know we have questions, but if anybody does want to express or say something, just click the raise hand button. But yeah, Ahmed, if you want to go ahead with some of the other questions.
sure. So the next question was that what are the spaces where we can intergenerationally connect with the youth? You all are providing us hope and grounding us in the commitment to build power collectively.
Could you say it one more time?
What are the spaces where we can intergenerationally connect with the youth? You all are providing us hope and grounding us in the commitment to build power collectively.
It's a great question. Yeah, so any of our panelists, feel free to jump in on that.
Or anyone else
Generational connect.
Anyone else on the Zoom as well has?
Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you for reminding that. If anybody else has a response to that, feel free to just hit the raise hand button too. So the question is around, how do we intergenerationally connect?
I could just start. Your hand goes up. Is there a hand? Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Isa.
Okay, sorry. On my end, it sounded like someone was trying to talk. Yeah, I just think there are many moments to do this. So it's like, you know, from anything, intergenerational conversations can happen at the dinner table. You know, can happen through this. This is a great example. You know, within our organization, we have leadership programs that are like, you know, sorry, my dog. We have these intergenerational conversations that are really important because we know that, you know, history of older trans women and younger trans youth, it's important to really engage in this conversation. So I think a place to find that is really, you know, looking at the folks who are doing that kind of work, but also you can do it in everyday conversations. You can follow the youth that are also like on this. So I don't know if you're followable, but you should, you know, if you could follow them and continue to listen to them. And, you know, and yeah, listening is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, if I can kind of jump in on that, actually, I think when I guess maybe I was hearing the question somewhat literally in the sense of intergenerational between different generations of, you know, youth and various other stages. But, you know, that, yeah, I want to uplift that because I think supporting each of the orgs here, I think could be one way. For us, for PYM, Palestinian Youth Movement, for us, really, we see the org itself as a way to be kind of an intergenerational mechanism in the sense that we're youth who are trying to build power for our communities, but we're also trying to also stay in touch with, you know, some of the other communities who may not be always in the direct political organizing that we're interested in, but we're trying to kind of get them back into that, or we're trying to see how we can kind of compare our efforts with one another. So we really try to emphasize community uplift, community empowerment, and community collaboration, right? Kind of in the sense of, you know, I thought it was great that the Black Panthers were brought up earlier because there was this idea, right, that part of your empowerment is also community services. And so with PYM, because we lost a lot of the institutions that the Palestinian movement had through the Oslo Accords, you know, we see part of our work is actually trying to build some of those back up. So we try to have centers, you know, where families can come, you know, if they don't have enough money to, you know, get the various sustenances that we need, we try to make centers where we can provide that. We try to have drives to be able to do that. And we also try to have town halls and things where we can have community, like inter-community dialogue about various issues. So I think in, you know, on one kind of more literal sense, supporting the work that PYM does can at least be supporting intergenerational Palestinian communication and collaboration. And then of course, the continued work of orgs to support one another. So all of our orgs to support each other's efforts, I think can go a long way towards that.
I have another, oh no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just reminding folks, if anybody else, if you don't have to be the panelist, you're welcome to respond to these questions. So just also wanted to remind folks of that too. Just hit the raise hand button. Okay, so yeah, if we can go ahead. I know you said we have a few questions, right? Okay, so, yeah, so the next one.
The other one is, so Omar, what are the differences you see in this movement and how inclusive is it adding trans and queer folks, disabled folks, deaf folks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, the question of differences, obviously, I think the main difference is just that this one kind of started in response to what had happened before and what we'd seen sort of not work before, which isn't to say that we've necessarily given up on the PLO as an institution, but just that we saw this direction where you get the PA and, you know, where you get basically a bureaucracy in place of a liberation movement. And so in the meantime, we've been trying to think, okay, how can we organize one another and trying to uplift the role of people who've been left out intentionally and bring them back into the equation. So I'd say that's how difference works. In terms of the question of being more inclusive toward differently abled folks, towards trans folks, towards queer folks, I think definitely a lot of us, particularly in the various US chapters, have been really trying to do that. And a lot of us, identify in those terms ourselves, right? So I identify as non-binary. We work with a lot of differentially. We work with like a lot of queer, non-binary trans folks as well. So we've been trying to do that. And also, trying to facilitate kind of ongoing, inter-community dialogues about that as well. So I definitely think it's a question of, on the one hand, responding to the political sort of setbacks of before, but also thinking about how our particular subjectivity, figures into the larger movement. I think that those two things kind of help us continue to refine how do we have more conversations about at times broadening the movement, and other times trying to make it seem that it's not really broadening in the sense that folks have always been in the movement, right? So it's not like a matter of so much saying that, oh, these folks are a part of the movement too. It's rather like everyone's always been a part of the movement, right? So really shifting the conversation on that terrain, I think.
Okay. So,
does any of the other panelists want to answer that question? Okay, cool. Yeah. So what is the next question?
So it says, thank you much to all of you for your radical insights. As a youth organizer in the Bay Area, my question to y'all is, how can youth begin to teach other youth about abolition and ways to begin to radicalize youth who are just stepping in the movement? How can we show up for them? Once again, I'm thankful for all your insights, sending so much love. So my question is that how can youth begin to teach other youth about abolition and ways to begin to radicalize youth who are just stepping in the movement, and how can we show up for them?
That's a really great question. And I won't necessarily put you on the spot, Glenda, but it would be dope to hear your insight, or any of the other panelists, around how you radicalize each other, or anybody in the meeting as well.
For youth that are stepping into the movement, I feel like it's important to respect their space. Like Isaac said, youth are gonna do what they want with the information. I don't say it. It's they choose what they can do with the information, whether they want to take it or not make any use of it. I think it's important just to really respect that. And we say this a lot, like the power, not paranoia. Just I don't know, just the education part about it. I don't know where I was going with that, but the first part I said, that's the key part I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. And I kind of put you on the spot because just the way you've expressed around this before. So no, thank you for sharing that. Do any of the other panelists have any response to that, or anybody else in the meeting?
And just to clarify, it's how do you bring youth into the conversation to the folks that are in our circles?
Yeah, how can youth begin to teach other youth about abolition and ways to begin to radicalize youth who are just stepping in the movement? How can we show up for them?
Yeah, I think that a lot of us have the powers of our community folks. I think that it starts with the relationships that we grew up with, that we have cultivated over the years, and understanding that people have different capacities. There was a dope article that Ellie, the artist, had put together, and it kind of ties to the question that was made before about for folks that don't have the capacity, or might have aren't able to get arrested or aren't able to show up. There are folks that can make signs, and using your words, using your artistic abilities to be able to create that content is one way, if you're not physically able to show up. Being eyes and ears, so making sure that you provide folks, that your friends that might go to protest or might show up, that you're providing them safety as far as like making sure you have their contact, making sure you have exit plans, making sure someone has eyes and ears on what's going on. And I know that with the curfew that was going on, that was a lot of things that were going on as far as mutual aid networks of like, well, okay, well, police are surveilling us and police have all this technology to surveil us, but not take care of us, so we can provide the resources to our own. So it's different capacities that people have. There's also the caretakers, the people who can supply things with medical supplies, who can maybe connect folks with the different street medics that exist. But it's I think first of all starting and cultivating those relationships and creating that safety of like, well, let's here are some tips that I might have, or here are some things that you might want to take care of. And I think part of my own and like Bby Anarchists, what we're trying to focus on as well is to provide that knowledge of like, okay, knowing that the state is surveilling you, knowing that the police have certain things to be able to locate your different activities and to be able to do all of that, why not also provide folks with the knowledge so that they can make decisions on their own? Because I remember being a youth, and when even with LA Students Deserve, they're talking about like defunding the police inside of the school, inside of the school specifically. The LA Unified School Districts, which is something that it's a movement that came from, I believe, Minnesota, which they were able to do. So it's seeing what capacity you have and how you want to chip away at the systems that we know are not legitimate and not for our communities, and being unapologetic about that too.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I think that also part of it is, for folks that may like be new, right, as the question stated, like folks that are new to the movement, a lot of it, I think specifically in the organizing spaces that Bby Anarchists kind of came from, a lot of it, like a lot of our radicalization, I think, came from personal experience, but then also from conversations that we were having with folks within the community. So being able to understand like the history, like starting the process of decolonizing, because the school system does teach us a bunch of lies, and they're whitewashed lies. So beginning that process of decolonizing, reading material, I think that, I guess, like the teacher in me, but also the student in me, really advocates for, reading circles or writing groups, places where people can develop and talk about theory, but then also places where people can use that theory and put it into practice, because it is important, right, to have the deep understanding, but also accompany that with direct action, because we're not going to get anywhere if we just theorize everything, right? We have to put our knowledge into practice and make sure that we're showing up. And so I think that's a big part of learning more about abolition and realizing that it's not this like far-fetched idea, right? Policing hasn't always existed, and it doesn't have to continue to exist, but it's also like building in from prior experience the lessons that our ancestors have passed on, and also other communities, and what do we do with that knowledge?
Great.
Thank you.
Should I move to the next one?
Yeah, that would be fine. Anybody else want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think I'll say it's, for us, it's a bit complicated in the sense that it depends on what youth we're talking about. But for example, I think, one of the things that we tend to do, particularly with Arab and or Palestinian youth that we come across is, or even not even just youth, honestly, like maybe even like adults or, people who have these kind of reactionary views, but who somehow understand that Palestine is a social justice struggle, but don't necessarily always see the same thing happening in the US. One of the things that we can do, it's kind of basic, but we start with an analogy. We look at, okay, why do you think what's happening in Palestine is wrong? Why do you think it's wrong if the Israeli occupation forces soldiers have complete, control over somebody, can kill them, brutalize them at will? Why is that bad? Then they respond. And then we point to, okay, so how do you see a distinction between that and what's happening with policing? And we kind of move from there. It's not an accusatory conversation, but it is kind of, It's a kind of a question and answer session. We let them say whatever they need to say, but we try to get it to a point where they start to understand that the exception they have in their mind doesn't actually stand, right? So that's one way. And I think, honestly, a lot of times youth can be more receptive to that kind of a thing because, they have this idea that maybe things are different, but then when you sort of bring it to them, like, well, why do you think it's different? Let's talk about that. They realize it may not be as different as they might have thought in the beginning, right? So I think for us, one of the things we do is we try to de-exceptionalize what, our people on the ground are going through from what's happening here. Again, not in the sense of flattening struggles, but in the sense of, like, literally you have an occupying power, and they have this monopoly on violence, they're inflicting it upon you, right? You see it here and it's bad. So let's talk about why it's different here, supposedly, right? And when you actually pose that question to them, right, and again, in a way that's not necessarily attacking them, but getting them to think about things, rethink things, you find people actually start to come around, right? So I think that's one of the things that we try to use, that kind of sort of a gentle pedagogical tool, but also getting them to the point where ultimately you start to realize there isn't really a justification for policing, for prisons, beyond this kind of general reactionary idea of, well, it has to, work for somebody somewhere. And like, well, why does it? Let's talk about who that somebody somewhere is, right? And the more you can have those conversations, the more you can get people to a point where they really start to question, what it is that makes people think that these things need to be in place.
Thank you for that, Omar. And just a question to how many more questions do we have in the chat? Just want to make sure.
We have a few.
Hopefully we'll try our best to get to all of them.
Yeah, there's a question, can GJLA and PYM speak more about solidarity between Black queer youth and Palestinian queer youth? How are we connecting and building understanding our connections of oppression and resistance?
Isaac or Gabe? It looks like Gabe maybe left.
Yeah, they had to step away. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that we need to always 100% be doing better on both sides, or just in general. I think that there's a way that we can embed, like, we embed a lot of our stuff in our political education and our leadership programs. So, like, folks are getting to understand, what are the issues in different communities. And I do think, yeah, it's definitely a point of, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was that can GJLA and PYM speak more about solidarity between Black queer youth and Palestinian queer youth? And how are we connecting and building understanding of our connections of oppressions and resistance?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of intersecting identities, right? Like being talked to Omar was talking about earlier, and seeing where there's moments of those intersecting solidarity moments to then continue the conversations. I do think, yeah, maybe I need to like sit back on this one for a minute and have someone else answer this and then jump in.
Thank you. Omar, did you, I know because the question was also directed to PYM as well. Did you want to share anything around it?
Yeah, definitely. Can I just hear the last part of the question again, the last few words?
Yeah, so it just...
the how can we build part, that was the one I just want to
right. How are we connecting and building understanding of oppression and resistance?
Okay, great, yeah.
And the connections between oppression and resistance, how are we building that understanding?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, that's a great question. And I think, there isn't necessarily a set answer because it's always kind of up in flux, depending sort of on the socio-political climate, if you will. Like, I think right now, as PYM, what we're really trying to do is center and uplift the directives of various Black organizers and organizations, that are responding to the current moment and trying to really direct as much of our resources as we can to really uplifting their efforts. In terms of the conversations about queerness, this has sort of been an ongoing struggle both in Palestine and here. A while ago, there were some uprisings in Palestine actually in response to gender and, queer-based violence, right? And basically Palestinians rising up and saying that, we basically embody all of these identities, and all of these forms of violence, are things that we as Palestinians suffer under. But the issue, as many of you know, is also that with Palestine, Israeli colonization comes to be justified under something called pinkwashing. So this idea that, oh, Israel is a haven for queer people, so it's okay if we kill and brutalize Palestinians, even queer Palestinians, and blackmail them for being queer and all of these horrible things, right? Because we're such an enlightened democracy and we support gay people, unlike these savage, people, right, that we're killing and brutalizing. So that's the other thing is, the Palestinian struggle is very much resisting this idea of pinkwashing, right? And honestly recognizing that queer Palestinians, non-binary Palestinians, women, are, at the forefront of the struggle in many ways, and unfortunately can be sidelined when struggles, like a lot of liberation struggles, come to center the charismatic male spokesperson, if you will. So we're very actively in that moment of continuing to resist against that. And so I think with that in mind, we continue to seek and try to link up with and uplift the voices of other organizations that are doing the work on the ground here. And so I'm glad that question was asked, because this is also an open invitation, honestly. If there are organizations that work around questions of Black liberation, but also queer Black liberation, and you would like to link up, we're definitely receptive to that. So hopefully we can get some information sent, after this talk, and we can continue to see what future collaborations would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, since we don't have the chat sort of open in that way, as something I just thought of, so if anybody does want to make any of these connections or wants to build with any of the folks who've been on the panel, you're welcome to reach out to stoplapdspying@gmail.com, or through our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we're happy to connect you too. So just wanted to name that. But yeah, I know we have about 15 minutes left.
Nadia, David has their hand up. So David, go ahead. I unmuted.
Okay. Thanks everyone for all of your insights. And I just had a question about intergenerational conversations with younger youths around junior high, because they're not old enough to be going out in the streets just yet, and but they're still of an age where I think we can invite conversation around policing. So I was wondering if any of you had any insights or suggestions or experiences you wanted to share around youth of that age group, junior high. So like 5th, 7th to like 7th, 8th grade.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, anybody welcome to answer that. Any of our panelists, anybody in the meeting? The question's really looking at how are we having these conversations and bringing in youth of the middle school age, right? So 5th, 6th, 7th grade who aren't able to get out on the street.
Some of us actually in the San Diego chapter of PYM, we set up a center in January 2019 that's really been working around basically the families of immigrants, and basically immigrant and migrant families, so primarily Palestinian, but also in some cases Syrian families and youth, right? And, the programming of the center has been kind of up and down depending on, how the funding works out and depending on where our capacity is. But part of what we've done is in the past, we've had actual social justice kind of presentations and conversations where activists actually come and speak, to an audience of varying ages, basically the families, right? And that includes the youth. So that's one way that we've sort of tried to do that, right? And of course, that includes conversations around, we would use the term abolition, in the conversation. I think the panelists tried to sort of like use that word without using it, not because it's a bad term, but just because they're trying to speak to, all levels of folks and talk more about, we don't need the border. Maybe we don't need the prison. Maybe we don't need, right? And then of course, we've had speakers come talk about the Black liberation struggle historically in the United States as well. So that's something we would like to continue doing, but that's one way because, that's included youth, up to the middle school age, definitely, that have been featured in those conversations. So that's one way that we've thought of it, but of course there are many other ways to continue having these conversations with folks.
Yeah. If I could even jump in on that, I know one of the things is also thinking of like art, right? Thinking of being in, of actually even trying to get into the classrooms. So I know for us with the coalition with the War and Youth stuff, a lot of the ways we've been able to connect to middle school and even younger has been really connecting with teachers, for example, getting into classrooms, or even having teachers do field trips or organizations that work with that age group. And I know, and Glenda, I'd love to hear what you want to add to this too, but I know like last summer we had about, what, 70 or so middle school youth can come to LA Can, right, Los Angeles Community Action Network, and did a whole workshop. And so so it's really also about like the messaging is also through the activities, right? I know one of our activities, I don't know, Glenda, would you like to explain that activity? I think it's a really great way you can do just with even little kids or middle school, the paper ball where you crumble it. Would you be down to explain that? Because I really love the way like you facilitate it too.
Yeah, so with the paper ball activity, so obviously you have a piece of paper and you separate it into 4 boxes, and then you have 4 lessons that correspond to each box, and it's anonymous, so like people don't feel like they're put on the spot. So it was a series of like suspicion questions. So like one is like, oh, what does being suspicious mean, or what does it look like? And then like you'll write it down in the first box, and then you'll crumple it up. And usually it's like best to like do it in like a circle. So you crumple up your piece of paper and you throw it into the middle of the circle, and everyone gets up and grabs a random piece of paper, and then it's all fun. They're like, oh my god, and then they're like throwing the throwing the paper balls into the circle, and then you get a piece of paper and you open it, and then you read what somebody else wrote, and then it continues on with the other questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and what's great about that activity, and you know, Glenda's facilitated it really well, is you can really do it with any question. So if your age group is a lot younger, you can definitely make the question, you know, more to their age group. So so yeah, that was something I thought of too. Yeah. Any? No, go ahead.
And plus, like with that workshop, I forgot about that workshop, but we showed this video. I think it was like what's happening on Elm Street, or what's going on in Jefferson neighborhood, something like that.
The Twilight Zone, yes.
The Twilight, I'm sorry, but it was something along those lines. So we showed the video, and then like after we showed it, we asked like, oh, like you see like the reoccurring theme. And I remember there's this one kid, and they full on like explained the whole like video, explained the whole gist, like, oh, everyone's paranoid, they're snitching on each other, this and that. And within that age group are very like absorbent, and they're able to see like what's going on. Yeah.
So thank you. That's really cool that you find a way to make it fun too, like activity centered. Thanks for sharing. And yeah, I'm also hearing too about that it's important to talk to the adults in their lives too, and maybe even like their older siblings even. I imagine too. You know. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I think. Wait, is there any other questions?
Yes, a couple comments. One comment is about what was the Zoom bombing like and the language that was used. So that's why the chat room. So there was a whole lot of an immediate, within about 1 minute, about 100 N words, you know, and then kill the babies and things like that. So pretty sort of hideous white supremacist stuff. So we were able to shut it down. And of course, this question, you know, just this is about internalized racism, about you know, being in a family and having you know, mixed race parents, but then also having the Black parent really taking on deep white supremacist attitudes, and then so in a sense where so that's what let me just quickly read this. So thank you all so much. This is similar to both the questions that came before. All my thoughts on the political conditions of the world really came from me thinking through personal family history and things of the ways the state shaped my relationship to my Black family. So piggybacking off of this discussion about intergenerational spaces, I don't talk with one of my parents and the other is white. So there's different politics. My Black parent was blatantly racist and held white supremacist beliefs. For those who have Black First Nations or POC parents and who feel comfortable sharing, what are those conversations with your family elders in your lives like? How do you deal with internalized racism in communities? Sorry, this is such a big question, but do you just have these conversations with chosen family? Um, or what are they like? Are there groups you all are trying to reach in particular? Would love to hear about how you navigate the power dynamics as a youth. I mean, I think this is a deep question. So, given the time, if someone wants to address that, people who haven't spoken, but yeah.
What kind of conversation to have with the parent?
I can give an answer. I just want to make sure that there isn't anybody else who wants to speak.
Yeah, or even anybody, yeah, who identifies with that experience
Yeah.
too. And, I mean, go for it, Omar. I don't know if nobody's stepped up. Yeah, then maybe somebody else will. But go for it.
Oh, Jabo, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so like the question was about like that white supremacy beliefs and stuff like that with parents and stuff like that and people in your household.
Yeah, mixed family household, but the Black parent here has internalized racism and just was believed to was sharing white supremacist beliefs.
Yeah, like honestly, I grew up in Belize. Like it's in Central America, but we lean a lot. We're the only Central American country that's a part of CARICOM, the only English speaking Caribbean. I mean, only English speaking Central American country. So a lot of our institutionalized oppression came from the British and the English folks. Um, and my mom was probably like 12 or 15 years old when Belize got its independent from Britain. So a lot of her beliefs and stuff like that is kind of like she can't see it. She can't see abolition. She can't see a world without police. She can't see a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. She doesn't agree with, and to a certain point, it's just because a lot of time, one is like they're already that so many years of them being in it and already used to it. It's hard for them to break away. And two, it's like the knowledge. A lot of people don't have the knowledge. Like even me, like growing up, like even when I first got into organizing, when they asked me like what would the world look like without police, and I had to take a good while to think about it. I knew that I had a strong dislike and I did not like police, but I could, like growing up, knowing like in a family like that, knowing that, you know what, police is gonna help you, this or whatever. It was hard to break away from that. So I feel like when it comes to conversations like that, some people are, I don't know if this is the right term, but ignorant towards learning new stuff. But I feel like if we could do our best to not just know what we're fighting for, but actually know the history behind it, know actually like know your knowledge, have your knowledge on hand so that you could teach them to see from your standpoint, but teach them to see what you're seeing, teach them the history of why it is the way it is and the reason why we're at where we at. And then I feel like that's one of the easiest and the only ways. It's not going to happen for every family. Sometimes it's even worse or harder. Um, you know, like my mom, she doesn't support it, but she doesn't stop me. I know some families really like get scrutinized and stuff like that. If you're doing this type of work and your parents is white or maybe even black, but don't support this type of work, you really get scrutinized and looked down and frowned upon. So I feel like it's gaining the knowledge enough to share with others, because you're not just gonna see that in your family. You're gonna go out there and talk to someone that's black that might be a Trump supporter or a pro-police, and you're gonna have to know how to explain stuff to them. You're gonna have to know how to make sure they grasp the concept of where you're coming from, and know that you're not stupid. You have the knowledge and you have the know-how on how to do it.
Thank you, Jabo. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's pretty much 8, and I didn't know if there were more questions, but I'm wondering too, maybe, do we have any more questions, or just wondering?
Yeah, no, we
Okay.
do. So, but I don't know if we can get to all of them. So yeah, but that was it.
I'm wondering, maybe a proposal I have could be maybe just like writing these questions down, and just seeing if any, sort of as a follow-up, seeing if any of our panelists want to like have any written responses. No pressure, of course. And then maybe we just put it out there, because definitely want to honor the fact that folks were asking questions as well. But probably I think we're going to have to pause and stop for today. But that's a proposal I have, and I'm happy to put that out there and see if any of our panelists do want to take a shot and answer that. And maybe we post it on our social media or include it in our MailChimp. Maybe that can start being something we do after the webinars.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think just in closing then, I just basically keep it super quick. I just want to really, really appreciate and honor, because this is really like, we're all so busy, right? And so I think to just really take this time to share knowledge with each other. This is when we talk about building power, right? And so hopefully folks got to really hear what everyone was saying about, and really just, there's such small to large ways that we build power and make these changes. So I just want to honor this really dope knowledge sharing that happened tonight. So I don't know if Hamid, if there's anything you wanted to.
About the questions that I'm reading, I think there are some repetitive questions too. So most of them have been answered. But I think it's also about anti-racism and the surveillance of youth. So I think that's more like the war on youth through surveillance and various other programs. That was mostly it, and things have been addressed mostly by folks here. So just want to quickly remind folks about next Tuesday's webinar, which is going to be on COVID and uprising, but around the various types of surveillances, because I think one of the things in these uprisings that somehow COVID sort of went off our radar, but there's a huge spike that is happening again. And we're going to have Dr. Dorothy Roberts next Tuesday as well, who's written extensively about the role of public health and the experimentation of the enslaved bodies, indigenous bodies, and how public health is a primary tool of policing and social control. And then what does it mean at this time of uprisings? So that's going to be next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. So and we'll also have Babita Amani and Jamie Garcia on that panel as well. So I think it's going to be an awesome conversation, just like today. Today was absolutely powerful and beautiful. Thank you all very much. And then next Tuesday also, it's a critical time to have that conversation. So please tune in.
And check out the War on Youth zine on our website too. A lot of the folks on the panel were part of creating that as well. So.
And it's right here.
Yes.
So the online zine, you can just click here and it just and then go on there. And just people can check it out. There's a printable version also that you can print. And yeah, all the graphics are by Bby Anarchists. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful storytelling piece. And we're trying to see if it could be also have motion graphics and some other way that the story can be told too. And we got hit up by a printing group in Portland who are printing these and then sending them to jails in California as a reading piece as well. So yeah. So it's on the website. Just it's part 2. There's issue 1 as well, and right now we're working on issue 3. That's going to be around COVID and public health and other pieces as well. So keep an eye out. All right.
Yes. Thank you all. Everyone, y'all have a great evening, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you all next Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.